Cold killed more soldiers in World War II than many people are comfortable admitting. Not always dramatically, not always overnight, but slowly, quietly, through exhaustion, trench foot, respiratory illness, and the steady erosion of combat effectiveness. Modern audiences assume sleeping bags were the obvious solution, yet many frontline soldiers either lacked them, abandoned them, or deliberately avoided them. What actually kept men alive in sub-zero forests, frozen steppe, and rain-soaked hedgerows was a far older, simpler, and more adaptable method: layered insulation combined with controlled microclimates. This wasn't improvisation born of ignorance. It was hard-earned knowledge, refined under fire, and it still matters today. If you study primary accounts from the Eastern Front, the Italian campaign, or the Ardennes, you'll notice a pattern. Soldiers who survived brutal winters weren't the ones with the best issued gear, but the ones who understood heat management. They knew that a sleeping bag could trap moisture, restrict movement, and become dead weight once soaked. Wool layers, improvised ground insulation, and airflow control were more reliable. The opening lesson here is simple but, a bit uncomfortable for modern sensibilities. Warmth is not about bulk, it is about regulation. The core trick was layering with intention, not accumulation. Soldiers wore multiple thin layers of wool and cotton rather than one thick garment. Wool retained insulating properties even when damp, a critical advantage in snow, sleet, and sweat-heavy conditions. Cotton absorbed moisture, but was often used as an inner sacrificial layer, changed or dried when possible. The key was adjustability. Men would add or remove layers before rest, not after they started shivering. That timing really mattered. Heat conservation began before the body lost heat, not in response to it. Ground insulation was treated as seriously as clothing. Sleeping directly on frozen earth drains, body heat faster than cold air ever will. Veterans learned to prioritize separation from the ground using whatever was available. Pine boughs, straw, folded greatcoats, spare uniforms, even empty ammunition crates turned flat. This practice actually predates World War II, but the scale of mechanized warfare forced it into constant use. Soldiers who skipped this step often woke with numb limbs, or not at all. The lesson here is clear and practical. If you are cold at night, look down before you look around. Shelter design mattered more than enclosed comfort. Rather than crawling into sealed cocoons, many soldiers slept under ponchos, tarps, or half-shelters that allowed moisture to escape. Condensation inside sleeping bags was a silent killer, soaking insulation and freezing overnight. Open shelters with controlled airflow reduced frost build-up and allowed wet gear to dry from body heat. German and Finnish troops were especially disciplined about this, often sleeping in rotating shifts near small fires, warming themselves without overheating. Heat spikes, followed by exposure, were avoided at all costs. Foot care was part of the same system. Trench foot and frostbite were not just medical issues, they were failures of thermal management. Soldiers loosened boots before rest to restore circulation, removed socks to dry them against their bodies, and rotated pairs whenever possible. Sleeping with boots on was avoided unless movement was imminent. This wasn't comfort-driven, it was survival logic. Modern outdoor enthusiasts can apply this directly. Dry feet are a heat source. Wet feet are a liability that spreads cold upward. One overlooked element was calorie timing. Soldiers learned that eating before rest, especially fats, increased internal heat production. Field manuals from multiple armies note the importance of warm drinks and dense rations before sleep. The body burns fuel to generate heat. Without it, no amount of insulation helps. This is a practical step anyone can apply today. Eat before bed in cold conditions, not after you wake up cold. You know, the absence of sleeping bags wasn't really a technological failure. It was, in fact, an adaptation to reality. Early sleeping bags were, well, heavy, slow to dry, and just plain impractical during constant movement. Many soldiers ended up discarding them during those forced marches or combat retreats. What replaced them wasn't a new bit of kit, but knowledge. Knowledge of how to build a thermal system using clothing, terrain, timing, and, of course, discipline. That knowledge saved lives quietly, without medals or recognition. Applying this today doesn't require reenactment or, nostalgia. It requires respect for fundamentals. Layer with materials that insulate even when wet. Insulate from the ground before you start worrying about blankets. Control moisture before it accumulates. Manage heat proactively, not reactively. Eat, adjust, and rest with intention. These are not just historical curiosities. They're principles tested under the worst conditions humans have, deliberately placed themselves in. World War II stripped survival right down to its essentials. Men learned quickly what worked and, sadly, what killed. Sleeping bags weren't ignored out of stubbornness, but because adaptability beat comfort every time. That lesson, it still holds. If you value deep history hard lessons and knowledge that, transcends eras, subscribe to Iron Age instincts. Share this with others who respect the past, not for nostalgia, but for what it still teaches us today.